After winning the election in 1828, Andrew Jackson dramatically departed from the founder's vision and fired hundreds of experienced federal employees, replacing them with party loyalists, rewarding his friends and punishing his enemies. Out of concern for the competence and integrity of the government, the founding fathers had established an independent civil service of employees who pledged to uphold the country's laws, which is why the first 6 presidents hired qualified professionals to key posts regardless of the party's affiliation. However, Jackson went in a new direction and only hired members of his own party who pledged their loyalty to him, and fired people of good conscience with a proven track record of putting the public interest and the common good of the nation before their own party. It became known as the spoils system when Senator William Marcy of New York gloated, "To the victors go the spoils." After the next 5 decades of corruption and cronyism, Congress had had enough of Jackson's nepotistic spoils system and passed the Pendleton Act, establishing a merit-based appointment process for civil service employees, one that has been in place for the last 141 years. However, as many of you know, President-elect Donald Trump has promised to overturn the Pendleton Act, end civil service protections, and reestablish a new version of the spoils system, saying that he plans to fire as many as 50,000 civil servants and replace them with people who are loyal to him only. We've already begun seeing the beginning of what this will look like with recent cabinet appointments, where he is rewarding grossly unqualified loyalists with destructive intentions to key government positions. It's a foreboding sign of massive corruption and cronyism that is on the horizon for our nation. But remember, do not let it cause you despair. Let it mobilize you. There's really nothing new under the sun. We've seen it before. Even the Jacksonian system was a revival of an older system that goes as far back as ancient Rome and was known as patronage. It was the primary social order, not just the political order of the Roman world, characterized by a hierarchical relationship between patrons and clients. Members of the upper class, or patrons, offered protection to lower class individuals who were called their clients. Patronage could consist of goods and services, money or legal help, or other material benefits in exchange for honor, praise, votes, and social influence. The patrons were the protectors and the sponsors and the benefactors of their clients. And in return, they received respect and political favors. Clients were required to offer daily greetings to their patrons. The number of these greeters helped determine the patron's rank and social status within Roman society. The best way to think about the patron system is to think about the way the Corleone family operated in The Godfather. It's not really far off, because the structure of the Italian mafia had its roots in the Roman system of patronage. In a society where there were no banks to loan money to people who were poor, no social services to create adequate safety nets, patronage became the most important social relationship in the provinces and in the city-states of the Roman Empire, including in the wealthy, decadent, bustling port city of Corinth. Few cities have ever had such a reputation. Corinth had a population of over 400,000 people at the time of Paul and was one of the largest, most beautiful modern cities in the empire. For about 150 years before Christ, Corinth was destroyed by the Romans. The men were slaughtered, the women and children were sold into slavery, and the city was laid in ruins for a century. But in 46 BC, Julius Caesar went and rebuilt the city, made it the seat of government, and a new Corinth rose from the ashes. Corinth was strategically important to the empire because it had 3 harbors that were literally the crossroads of the world, where north and south trade routes intersected with east and west traffic. It was a place of great commercial trade where merchants came from all over the globe to trade with each other, making it one of the most dominant cultural centers of the day, materially prosperous, intellectually strong, and morally bankrupt. Corinth was known for its corruption. The very name Corinth came to imply licentiousness. To Corinthianize meant to live in debauchery. People went to Corinth intentionally to be Corinthianized as a rite of passage, like going to Panama City on spring break or going to South Beach, Miami at any time of the year. In Paul's day, the city had several nicknames: Carnal Corinth, Vanity Fair, it's not just a magazine, and yes, Sin City. Corinth was the Las Vegas of the Roman Empire. Now, when evangelicals preach about Corinth, they often say the reason it was known as Sin City is because of all the excessive drinking and sexual immorality that was happening. And I will admit there were a lot of wine bars and sex workers in Corinth. But the scholarly consensus is that Corinthian immorality was actually born of excessive wealth and greed. Paul's first letter to the church there directly attacked class divisions that existed between higher class and lower class Corinthian members who did not have equal access to food during communion. The wealthy were showing up first and eating all the food before the poor could get off work and join the feast. And as you can imagine, this made Paul furious, not just because the poor were hungry, but because they had allowed the Roman system of patronage into the church. For Paul, there were not supposed to be any divisions between patron and client, rich or poor in the church, because the hierarchical social relations of the empire were not supposed to determine one's participation in the community of Jesus. But the wealthy Corinthians were so deeply wedded to this old patron-client system, they actually tried to entice Paul to take a patronage. They offered Paul money if he would become one of their clients. It would have made life a lot easier for Paul. He would have been the in-house philosopher or rhetorician or chaplain of one of the wealthy families in Corinth, and he probably would have been protected for the rest of his life from persecution and death and taken care of financially. But Paul refused to participate in the patronage system. He refused to commit himself to this stratified vision of reciprocity, which would place him in a socially inferior position to the patrons, but also make it seem like he was taking sides with the wealthy faction in Corinth against the poor. But even more importantly, Paul did not believe in patronage as a way of life. And he had a vastly different vision of society in mind, not just for the Corinthians, but for all Christians. Paul was in a dangerous predicament. To accept patronage would curry favor with powerful people in Corinth, and yet at the same time trap him in a dependent position with an inescapable web of obligations to the wealthy. However, if he refused patronage, he would set himself up for hostility from the wealthy in the community, which is exactly what happened to Paul. Because he declined participation in their most sacred social arrangement, the wealthy in Corinth slandered Paul constantly. They created slurs about his social background. They charged him with immorality. They attacked his physical appearance. They made jokes about his accent, about the way that he dressed. They accused him of mismanagement and all sorts of other devious behaviors. And at the time, Paul was doing nothing but trying to help other people. He was collecting money from the churches that he'd planted all across Asia Minor to give to the poor Christians who were living in Jerusalem that were suffering under persecution and famine at the time. He was a fundraiser. But people don't always take kindly to fundraising campaigns, do they? Especially when the fundraiser has turned his nose up at the most sacred social relationship that was the bedrock of Roman society. But see, patronage was the problem. Paul refused to participate in this system because he believed it was preventing the people of Corinth from living in genuine community as followers of Jesus and preventing them from experiencing the abundant joy of living in true community. So Paul invited the Corinthians to reimagine their relationships and the entire social order in light of the new humanity and the new creation that Jesus had established in his life and in his ministry. Paul said there was no longer Jew or Greek or male or female or slave or free, but all are one and equal in Christ, which means there should no longer be a hierarchy of patron and client in the church either. A new social arrangement, a new form of community was born in the good news of the empty tomb, and it was characterized by a love so powerful, people were willing to share everything in common, as they did in the book of Acts. The key word is share. Paul has been frequently and blatantly misused to bless the unholy social arrangements of Southern culture, which has led many progressives to imagine that Paul was a social conservative. But the reality is that Paul was a countercultural figure who rejected the two dominant elements of Roman society: social status and the system of patronage. And in their place, Paul offered an attractive alternative, a community of equals. And the name for this new community was not ecclesia or church, as it later came to be called. The word was koinonia, which means the sharing or the fellowship. A community of people whose relationships go so far beyond the bounds of friendship, they are no longer determined by the social order of the empire, but how much they share with each other. A new creation, a new humanity had come into existence with Christ, and it was called koinonia, which literally translates the sharing. Now, I'm not trying to suggest a new name for our church, but it is stunning that the word Paul used to describe the church was the sharing. He could have named it the thinking about each other, right? Or the believing with each other, or the praying for each other, or the reading of Richard Rohr with each other, right? But he called it the sharing with each other, which implies a mutuality, a reciprocity, and necessitates generosity. Paul's vision of koinonia was not only a challenging alternative to the system of patronage in Rome, but also the system of individualism that we find in America today, our cutthroat culture that tells us there is not enough to go around. So go out and get yours. Make all you can. Put yourself and your family first. Keep as much as you want. Take care of your own. But that is antithetical to Jesus' vision of the kingdom and Paul's vision of koinonia. I remember a time I was serving on the board of directors at a nonprofit organization in Northern Virginia. And we were just at a regular nonprofit board meeting, and I overheard one of the wealthy board members say to another, "You know, Bob, we couldn't find anything to get excited about this year to give our $2 million to. So we're going to move the money back into our donor family advised fund for another year." And I thought, really? You couldn't find anything to get excited about this year? The year was 2009. The housing crash had destroyed millions of families' lives all over the country. I thought, you couldn't get excited about hunger, housing, healthcare? You couldn't get excited about education, economic injustice, environmental sustainability? You couldn't get excited about children or even veterans? Or how about animals? If all the disparities impacting entire communities of people in our country at the time who were suffering and dying every day don't get you excited enough to give the $2 million you have per year, What will? I thought. What will? I wish I'd said that. But of course I sat there and said nothing. Paul wrote this letter to help the people of Corinth to get excited about being generous people, to be eager to share their resources with their fellow Christians. And development directors and campaign managers and stewardship coordinators should learn from Paul here in this passage. To ignite the Corinthians' excitement about generosity, Paul made a series, I don't know if you notice in the passage, a series of compelling appeals, one after the other. First, he appealed to the Corinthians' tendency to compare themselves to others by telling the Corinthians how much the Macedonians, who were extremely poor, had given generously and joyfully to the collection beyond their means. I don't know if you noticed, Paul goes on and on about the Macedonians and how poor they were and how much they gave to the collection, basically saying to the Corinthians, are you going to let the poor Macedonians show you up? Second, Paul appealed to their integrity, reminding the Corinthians that they had made a pledge to support the campaign and had not yet completed it. That they had made a pledge to support the campaign and had not yet completed it. I'm sorry. Third, he appealed to their egos by extolling all the ways that the Corinthians excelled in everything. Remember all that stuff in the love chapter in 13 about how they excel in love? And here he says, you excel in faith, you excel in speech, you excel in knowledge, you excel in eagerness, you excel in love. And then he says, why don't you excel in generosity? Something's missing. And then fourth, Paul brought down the hammer by reminding them how Jesus had generously given his life for them. Game, set, match, right? But then Paul doubles back to his point about the Corinthians finishing their pledge, just like a professional fundraiser, before finally making an appeal about the gift of participating in true community, in true koinonia. He saved the best part for last, saying, I'm only asking you to give according to your means out of what you already have. The goal's not to relieve your neighbor's burdens by putting some kind of economic pressure on you, but a fair balance in the community. You give out of your present abundance to help them in their need, and then perhaps one day they will return the favor for you when you are in a situation of need. That's what koinonia is all about. This is what community is all about. When we share, the one who does not have too much and the other does not have too little. Paul was saying, we may never reach perfect equality on this side of the grave, but if we share our resources, our neighbors won't go hungry because there is enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. Last Sunday, after a devastating election, you may have noticed there were twice as many people in this church than there were the week before. And as I looked out over the congregation, I realized something very profound. I realized that the very people this election has put in the most danger are not out there somewhere else, but right here in our pews. I saw immigrants, transgender individuals, women, people of color, low-income, working-class people, and many others negatively impacted by this election sitting in our sanctuary, tears streaming down their faces, desperate for answers, in need of protection, clinging to hope, and at the same time, filled with gratitude for this church, for the love and the koinonia that they receive right here in this place, in this community. You cannot put a price on that. The people being attacked are no longer abstract to us. They are the friend we greeted during the passing of the peace. They are the family sitting in the pew beside us. We know each other now, and we need each other right now more than ever. There was a time when our church was a lot more like the Corinthians, a privileged community who gave out of our abundance to meet the needs of our poor and vulnerable neighbors outside these walls. But our church has changed, and now we are all here together in one community. We've become more like a mix between the Corinthians and the Macedonians, a beautifully diverse family of faith, which means the stakes have changed for all of us. But I believe that Myers Park Baptist is a church that was built for such a time as this. We were born at the height of fascism, in the middle of World War II, to be a community that exists as an antidote to the thoughtlessness of fascism and the madness of war. Our forebears created a church that was open to all and closed to none, where people can journey together free of rigid dogma, an inclusive community for spirituality and social justice. And over 82 years, we've sharpened our teeth by taking stands against racism and war, the death penalty, religious bigotry, patriarchy, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, and environmental degradation. And now we face a threat to our country, our democracy, our neighbors, our friends, and our fellow church members that is as dark and as dangerous as the one that our forebears faced in 1943. But moments like this is what we were made for. This is exactly why we exist as a church. We are a church. We are the church that the world needs most right now. The poor and vulnerable of our world, the targeted, are depending on us to rise to the occasion. We must face this moment with strength and conviction, and that will require each and every one of us to dig deep into our hearts and into our pockets and into our wallets and into our bank accounts to give all that we possibly can to empower this community to be the church that our world needs right now at this moment. I know a lot of us are afraid. Everything feels uncertain and precarious. We don't know what our country will look like tomorrow, let alone the next 90 days. We don't know what our lives will look like. In times like this, it's natural, an instinct for us to batten down the hatches and hold on to everything we can and wait out the coming storm. But the truth is, that won't make our fear or our anxiety go away. As scholar Walter Brueggemann writes, in a system of anxiety and fear, only acts of overwhelming generosity can redirect our energies away from anxiety and toward a greater purpose beyond ourselves. Only a surprising act of generosity beyond all categories of expectation has the power to break the death grip that anxiety and fear have over our lives and free us for abundant joy. When we are immersed in immense generosity, we're able to take our minds off of ourselves and off of all the problems that we face and focus on the work of loving our neighbors and our friends. It is precisely an inexplicable act of generosity that delivers us from the cycle of scarcity and frees our lives for the koinonia and the mutual sharing that we call community together. We are a community where there are no patrons or clients, no rich or poor, no male or female, no slave or free, no Jew or Gentile, no gay or straight, no black or white, but where everyone is included and welcomed and accepted and loved and embraced and cared for equally, regardless of who they are. We are a community of koinonia, a community of mutual sharing. Our church is literally changing lives. And there is nothing our world needs more right now than communities like ours. There's nothing the vulnerable need more right now, nothing the marginalized need more right now, nothing the privileged need more right now, nothing America needs more right now than communities like this one. There's no price you could put on a community like this. All we really have, when it boils down to it, is each other. All we really have is what we share, what we build, how we care for each other, how we love for each other, and none of it exists without generosity. There is no community without generosity, no church without generosity, no faith without generosity, no life without generosity, no joy without generosity. And as Paul said in this letter, This moment is a test of the genuineness of our love, which means that now is the time to dig deep, to roll up our sleeves, to complete the generous undertaking that we already started. Now is the time to finish what we started with eagerness and passion and zeal and excitement. Now is the time to invest. Now is the time to share. Now is the time for koinonia. Now is the time for this community. We are the church the world needs right now, so let's give like we believe in it. Amen.